So carrying on with our SOAP service, we can see that most of our requests are now either returning a valid SOAP fault or returning the required result that we're expecting. But we've just got this one problem remaining now where we have a deserialization error. So this is when we have some mandatory values, so our value is expected in our case and we don't supply it. Then the MVC framework kicks in to tell us that it's expecting a mandatory value and it can't deserialize that input. And in that case, it doesn't even get into our controller method. The framework handles this before we get there, and it's returning us a default REST problem details response. So we need to go and look at how we can change this so that we get back a valid SOAP fault containing the error instead of this problem details. So let's go and have a look at getting rid of this problem details for this deserialization problem. So it turns out there's something that we can use for this called the InvalidModelStateResponseFactory, and that basically takes a model state and converts it into an appropriate iAction result. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new API behavior options file inside of our SOAP folder, so inside of MVC customizations. This is just a normal extension class, and in here we're going to add an InvalidModelStateResponseFactory method, and as we can see it returns an iAction result. And what we're going to do is get the first error out of the model state from the action context that's passed in and get the error message from that. That becomes our SOAP fault error message that we're going to use. And if we don't get a error message from that model state, then we can just default it to something. Then we're going to look in that action context against the controller that's been called and see if we can get a SOAP controller attribute against it. So basically if we find a SOAP controller attribute, then we should be returning a SOAP fault. But then we can just interrogate the SOAP attribute to get the SOAP version. And if it's a SOAP 1.1 service controller that we're dealing with, then we return a new SOAP 1.1 response envelope. Otherwise, we return a SOAP 1.2 envelope. And in both cases, we just return the SOAP fault with the fault string that we've got from the model context or the default one. So that deals with our SOAP side of things. Now, if it's not a SOAP controller, we still have to deal with and pass back a normal RESTful response. So to do that, we can get hold of the problem details factory from our dependency injection and then check if our model state validation state is set to invalid. Then in that case we want to return a validation problem details and a bad request result, so a 400 status. And if it's not an invalid model, then we just create a standard problem details and return an object result and a status of 500. And then to wire this in over in our program CS, after we've added the controllers and the serializer formatters, we can go and configure the API behavior options and override the InvalidModelStateResponseFactory with the static method that we just created. And then when we run this up, if I put a breakpoint in our InvalidModelStateResponseFactory, send in my serialization problem, we can see that we get our fault string that we were seeing in the problem details. We do get a SOAP attribute, so therefore we will return a SOAP fault, in this case a SOAP 1.1 fault. So that now gives us a valid SOAP fault with the error that's coming from the model state. And just to prove that we haven't broken anything with regards to our RESTful requests or controllers, I've got my REST controller here with my GET request, and I'm just going to add in a custom error to the model state and return a validation problem. And I've still got my breakpoint inside my custom invalid model state, and we'll see that when I send this in, it doesn't hit that, so it's just passing us the default response that the web API would normally return us. So let's just save that for now. And then what we can do is come over here and override the validation problem so that we retrieve our factory from our dependency injection, and we call that to return our action result instead. And this time, if I send that in, I do break into my invalid model state factory. It's not a SOAP controller, but the model state is invalid, so we create a standard validation problem details and return a bad request. And if we compare that with the previous one that we got that wasn't using our factory, we can see that they are in fact identical and returning exactly the same information. So we haven't broken anything from the default framework with regards to RESTful requests. So that's it. How to overcome these deserialization errors or problems inside the MVC framework and still return a valid SOAP fault for our SOAP service. So now that's all of our test requests are working and sending back SOAP responses instead of RESTful responses. So a relatively quick and painless tutorial, this one. So just a quick thank you to my sponsors as usual. And with that, I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.